Lee Marvin was a famous movie star from the 1950s and 1960s. People called him the last soldier of Hollywood. Until the day he died, there were certain actors he refused to work with. He openly talked about 7 people he absolutely hated. He wasn't the kind of star who tried to make everyone happy. He was tough and straight-talking, just like a real soldier. When he was filming movies, he would sometimes throw his hat on the ground, smash his drink glass, or even walk away from filming just because he didn't want to be on screen with certain people. When he wasn't filming, he never held back from saying exactly what he thought about them. He once said, "I'd rather quit acting completely than stand next to someone pretending to be a hero." Those 7 people weren't nobody. They were huge stars that everyone loved. Some were his co-stars, some were his rivals, and some had even had drinks with him after filming scenes together. So why did he hate them so much for so many years? Was it just because his feelings were hurt? Was he jealous? Or was there some dark secret about Hollywood that nobody wanted to talk about? Lee Marvin was born in 1924 in New York City. His family had a long history of people serving in the military. When World War II started, he quit school and joined the Marine Corps. They sent him to fight in the Pacific Ocean area. During a battle in a place called Saipan, he got shot by a machine gun. The bullet badly hurt a nerve in his back, and he spent over a year in the hospital recovering. Because he was wounded in battle, they gave him a Purple Heart Medal. This proved that he had really bled and suffered on the battlefield. Maybe it was the war that made Lee Marvin the way he was: blunt, tough, and unwilling to back down. Unlike lots of Hollywood actors who just wore uniforms to play soldiers in movies, Lee Marvin had actually lived through a real war. He knew what mud, blood, and real bullets were like. They weren't just movie props to him. He had crawled through ditches during battles, watched his friends die right next to him, and carried scars from the Pacific War for his whole life. That experience turned him into an actor who didn't have to pretend. Every angry look and tight-jawed expression he made on screen came from real memories, not just acting skills. After he left the military, Marvin didn't go straight to Hollywood. He drifted around doing different jobs, living like he was invisible. Then one day, something lucky happened. An actor got sick and couldn't perform, so they pulled Marvin in at the last minute to replace him. He had no training and hadn't prepared at all. But the moment he got on stage, he was amazing. He was tall, had cold steel eyes, and so much raw energy that audiences couldn't look away from him. Right then, he knew he was born to be in front of cameras. Marvin started out playing small roles as nameless bad guys, but he quickly became the actor that every director wanted to hire. In a movie called The Big Heat from 1953, he played a scary gangster that made everyone in Hollywood notice him. In another movie called Bad Day at Black Rock from 1955, just one look from him was enough to make viewers feel super tense. When the 1960s came around, Lee Marvin stopped playing supporting roles and became a real legend. In The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance from 1962, he played a villain named Liberty Valance. He was so good and so memorable that audiences remembered him more than the big stars John Wayne and James Stewart. 3 years after that, he amazed everyone by playing 2 completely different characters in a movie called Cat Ballou from 1965. One was a drunk mess, and the other was a cold-hearted killer. He was so good that he won the Academy Award for Best Actor. But that success also made Lee Marvin an outsider in glamorous Hollywood. That's because he didn't just dislike fake people. He could never forgive actors who wore their fame like a costume and didn't respect acting as a serious craft. Throughout his career, Marvin openly made a list of 7 people he would never shake hands with, never appear in a movie with, and actually never even look at again. The first name on that list was Hollywood's biggest cowboy star, John Wayne. Number 1. John Wayne, the hero who never went to war. John Wayne was a name that everyone connected with the American hero image. He wore cowboy hats, stood proud, and smiled fearlessly in the face of danger in his movies. Millions of Americans thought he was the perfect example of what a man should be, the pride of a whole generation. But to Lee Marvin, it was all just one big act. Marvin had crawled through battle ditches, heard bullets screaming past his ears, and carried the dead bodies of his friends on his back. He could never respect a so-called hero who had never actually held a real gun in a real war. Wayne never signed up to fight. When World War II was happening, he stayed safe in Hollywood. He avoided being drafted into the military and kept building his image as a tough soldier through safe, scripted movie scenes behind a camera. To Marvin, that wasn't just being a hypocrite. It was a personal insult. On the set of a movie they worked on together, the air felt heavy, like a storm was about to happen. The cameras were quiet, and the crew was waiting. But what they were about to see wasn't in the script. John Wayne, who was the bigger star and who America worshipped as an icon, walked up to Marvin. Half joking but half serious, he said, "Lee, you're taking up too much attention in the scene. Calm down the intensity so the audience can see me too." A few people laughed awkwardly to break the tension, but Marvin didn't laugh. He stared at Wayne for a long moment, not with the eyes of an actor playing a cowboy, but with the eyes of a man who had crawled through muddy battlefields soaked in blood, and picked up the bodies of friends while under enemy fire. Then suddenly, he took off his cowboy hat and threw it hard on the floor. The loud thud echoed in the scary silence. Marvin walked slowly toward Wayne and stopped just close enough that everyone on set could hear him breathing. Then he spoke, not loudly, but with a chill that made everyone's spines stiffen. "You might act like a soldier better than I do, but you will never know what mud smells like on a battlefield, what blood tastes like, or what it sounds like when bullets tear through the air over your head." Nobody dared to say anything. One of the camera operators later remembered that he could actually hear the clock ticking after Marvin said that. Wayne just stood there with his smile frozen on his face, like someone had just exposed a secret he'd been hiding his entire career. They still finished making the film together. They still shook hands at fancy red carpet events and posed for photos side by side as if nothing had happened. But in Marvin's eyes, Wayne had died in that moment, died as a man he could ever respect. From that day on, they weren't just two actors who appeared in the same movie. They represented two completely different worlds. On one side was a man who had lain in blood-soaked battle ditches and understood what it really cost to survive. On the other side was someone who built his heroic image from scripted lines and stage lights. They stopped greeting each other politely. They stopped making small talk. Between them stretched an invisible gap, not just a few feet of movie set space, but a huge canyon carved out of broken trust and lost dignity. Marvin once told his close friends during a night of heavy drinking, "I'd rather quit acting and walk away from the screen forever than share a scene with a fake hero." And he meant it. For the rest of his life, there wasn't a single scene, a single movie project, or a single moment where Lee Marvin had to swallow that disgust and work with Wayne again. But if Wayne represented fake heroism, painted to look noble and good, then at the other end were people that Marvin hated even more. People who believed that being famous gave them the right to walk all over everyone else and ignore all the rules. And nobody represented that better than Frank Sinatra. A star so huge he thought entire film crews should revolve around him like planets around the sun. Marvin once admitted that just hearing Frank Sinatra's name is enough to make my blood boil. Number 2. Frank Sinatra, the king of ego-if. Lee Marvin ever truly hated someone down to his very bones. That person was Frank Sinatra. Sinatra was a legendary singer, a box office superstar, an American icon, and to Marvin, the perfect example of Hollywood's worst ego problems. Marvin's hatred wasn't about Sinatra's talent. He never said Sinatra didn't have a beautiful voice or wasn't charming on screen. It was about Sinatra's arrogance, which often crossed the line into pure disrespect. Sinatra was famous for showing up late to film sets, leaving early before work was done, and demanding that entire film crews change their schedules to fit his personal plans. But one time, he pushed things way too far. The fight between them started even before cameras started rolling, during negotiations for a project they were supposed to work on together. That day, the entire crew waited for almost half a day. The set lights got hot from being on so long. The script was ready to go, but Sinatra, the king of Hollywood, was nowhere to be found. When he finally showed up 5 hours late, he didn't apologize. He just glanced lazily at everyone, had a cigarette hanging from his lips, and said something so cold it made the room freeze. "Hope you've all been waiting long enough." But it didn't stop there. Right in the middle of filming one day, Sinatra simply walked off the set, tossing over his shoulder, "Not feeling the vibe today. I'm leaving." For Lee Marvin, a man who had crawled through battlefield mud and treated being professional like it was life or death, that was the final straw. He stormed toward Sinatra with blazing, angry eyes. Some crew members later said that if 3 people hadn't physically held Marvin back, he would have punched Sinatra right there on set. But Marvin's fury didn't end when filming stopped. In 1966, at a Hollywood party, someone casually mentioned Sinatra's name in conversation. Marvin slammed his whiskey glass onto the table so hard that it shattered into pieces. Shards flew everywhere as he growled each word into the stunned silence. "Frank thinks the whole world owes him a standing ovation, but he's never done a single damn thing to actually deserve it." Hollywood had never heard anyone talk about Sinatra like that before. And of course, Sinatra wasn't the type of person to just let it go. Later on, he reportedly sneered in front of a crowd. "That meathead in a uniform thinks he's so noble just because he survived a war." The insult spread through Hollywood like wildfire, and with it, any hope of them ever working together went up in flames. From potential co-stars, they became sworn enemies. Then came the final blow. Sinatra had originally been cast as the lead in a famous movie called The Dirty Dozen. But suddenly, just before filming began, he dropped out. The official reason given was scheduling conflicts. But Hollywood gossip told a different story. Sinatra didn't want to share the screen with a real war veteran, someone who he knew would make him look small and fake by comparison. From that point on, Marvin never spoke Sinatra's name with any respect again. To him, Frank wasn't the king of music or a screen legend like the public adored. He was just an arrogant man living in a bubble of fame, a world where everyone had to revolve around his massive ego. When someone asked Marvin if he ever regretted their feud, his reply was cold and almost mocking. "I've faced machine guns and survived. But when I have to face Frank Sinatra, I feel absolutely nothing." While Marvin's feud with Sinatra was like a fiery war of giant egos, his clash with Burt Lancaster was completely different. It was a slow, cold, poisonous conflict. There were no smashed glasses and no public shouting matches, just a silent battle of willpower, status, and pride, where both men believed only one of them truly deserved to stand at the center of the screen. Number 3. Burt Lancaster, Clash of the Titans. C. 1960s Hollywood had a secret fighting arena where egos collided with maximum force. At the center you'd find these 2 men. Lee Marvin, the wild, battle-hardened soldier who lived every inch of his life authentically, and Burt Lancaster, the born star who was overflowing with confidence and convinced he was destined to lead all of Hollywood. They weren't natural enemies from the start. In fact, there was a time when people expected them to become the golden dream team of action and war films. But the truth is simple. Two suns can't shine in the same sky at the same time. The feud didn't start with a fistfight. It started with Hollywood's dream of pairing them together. A major movie studio wanted to create an unbeatable partnership. They imagined Marvin's raw, storm-like intensity paired with Lancaster's deep, powerful acting skills. But just before the contract was about to be signed, Lancaster coldly refused to do it. His reasons shocked the entire industry. Marvin doesn't have the depth to carry a complex psychological role. That sentence was like a bullet shot straight into the pride of a man who had crawled through mud, gunpowder smoke, and the dead bodies of his comrades. Marvin didn't stay quiet about it. At a press conference weeks later, he set down his whiskey glass, looked straight into the camera, and fired back. "I don't need to pretend to be deep like he does. I just need to act real." From that moment on, Hollywood stopped being a place where they could peacefully coexist. It became a battlefield of silent attacks, with each man finding ways to hurt the other without throwing actual punches. Rumors spread that Lancaster was secretly using his powerful influence to pressure a studio into cutting Marvin's role in a major project. When Marvin found out, he didn't explode in anger. He simply withdrew from the film the very next morning, walking away from millions of dollars without looking back. Not long after that, when he was offered another big project that included Lancaster, he turned it down with just one simple line: "If Lancaster's in the film, then I'm not." But the war didn't stop inside the studio gates. At fancy Hollywood parties, Lancaster would pretend not to even see Marvin. Once he even sneered in front of mutual friends, saying, "Some people act like they're shouting at the audience because they have nothing else to show." The comment hung in the air like a stray bullet, and everyone knew exactly who it was aimed at. Marvin didn't respond right away. He simply raised his whiskey glass, took a slow sip, and then turned to those same friends with eyes as sharp as a knife blade. "Maybe that's because I actually did shout on the battlefield, not on a safe movie stage." From that moment, this wasn't just professional rivalry anymore. It was a war over honor, a grudge that could never be settled or forgiven. People say that once, when Marvin walked into a major Academy Awards event, Lancaster quietly left the room just minutes later. Not because he was busy, but because he didn't want to breathe the same air as Marvin. According to one veteran movie producer, if Burt was in dressing room number 1, Lee would never set foot inside that room. Studios would rather lose millions of dollars than try to put them in the same scene together. In a world where most people shake hands and play nice just to survive in Hollywood, Marvin and Lancaster chose to live as mortal enemies. And every time one man's name was mentioned, the other's eyes turned ice cold, as if he was standing once more in a blood-soaked battle trench. The Cold War between Marvin and Lancaster might have been icy and calculated, but compared to what came next, it was still almost a gentleman's duel. Because after Lancaster, Marvin faced a completely different kind of anger, not born from arrogance or intelligence, but from pure carelessness and lack of caring. If Lancaster drove him crazy with ego, Robert Mitchum would push him completely over the edge for one much simpler reason: an absolute lack of respect for the craft of acting itself. Number 4. Robert Mitchum. The idealized slacker Mitchum was incredibly talented. Nobody could deny that. His rugged good looks, devil-may-care attitude, and effortless cool made him one of the most magnetic men ever to appear on movie screens. But it was precisely that effortless attitude that made Lee Marvin want to throw a punch every single time he saw the man walk onto a film set. From day one, Marvin was furious about Mitchum's behavior. Mitchum would show up drunk, wouldn't know his lines, and openly admitted he didn't really care about acting. During one crucial scene, while the entire crew was waiting for their cue to start filming, Mitchum fell asleep right there on the set. Marvin didn't say a word at first. He just walked over and slapped Mitchum hard across the face, hard enough to snap him awake instantly. The entire crew froze in shock. "Wake up!" Marvin growled. This is a film set, not a bar. But instead of sobering Mitchum up and making him behave better, the slap only added more fuel to their already simmering fire. At a party in the Hollywood Hills, a drunken Mitchum actually hurled a glass at the wall after Marvin called him a lazy man who's worshipped like a god. Mitchum didn't stop at just insults either. During a critical filming scene, he deliberately changed his scripted lines while the cameras were rolling. This ruined Marvin's performance and forced the entire crew to reshoot everything from scratch. To Marvin, this wasn't just unprofessional behavior. It was like stabbing him in the back on purpose. The atmosphere on set turned to complete ice. Everyone stood frozen in place while Marvin remained silent. A silence so heavy it felt like a gun, with a bullet loaded and ready to fire. Then suddenly, he hurled his script to the floor. Pages scattered everywhere like exploding shrapnel. "You think this is a joke?" he roared, his voice hoarse with fury and contempt. "Dozens of people are working their butts off here. Hundreds of hours wasted, all because of one man who doesn't respect this craft." Nobody had ever seen Marvin lose his temper like that before. He stepped right up to Mitchum with eyes that seemed to burn holes through the man's smug, indifferent expression. "You want to sabotage the film? Fine, but don't expect me to forgive you. Ever." After that day, Marvin refused to speak to Mitchum about anything. Not a single word, not a glance, not even a simple hello. Movie producers stopped daring to put them in the same project together. One producer recalled that if Marvin saw Mitchum's name on a cast list, he'd throw the script on the table and walk out of the room without saying a word. If Lancaster had been like a knife stabbing at Marvin's pride, then Mitchum was a punch directly to his very belief in what acting should be. After that clash, Marvin didn't just despise Mitchum. Personally, he despised the entire Hollywood system that had turned a man he saw as lazy and careless into a so-called legend. But Mitchum wasn't the last person to make Marvin grit his teeth in frustration at Hollywood's broken system. There was still one more cowboy, a younger star who, in Marvin's eyes, basked in the spotlight without ever breaking a sweat or earning it. Clint Eastwood. Number 5. Clint Eastwood. Two alpha wolves can't share the same pack. When Clint Eastwood rose to stardom in the late 1960s, Hollywood had changed dramatically. It was no longer a place that celebrated men who had survived bombs, bullets, and battle scars. It had become a playground for cool guys who knew exactly how to stand in the right spot and deliver the right line with style. To Lee Marvin, a man who had crawled through mud, dragged the dead bodies of his fallen brothers across battlefields, and survived the terrifying sound of gunfire, this felt like an insult to the entire craft of acting. On the set of Paint Your Wagon from 1969, tensions flared over even the smallest things. While Marvin approached every single scene with the seriousness of a soldier heading into actual battle, Eastwood would just stroll onto the set looking calm, quiet, and acting like everything came easily to him without effort. One day, as the crew was discussing the script together, Marvin glanced over at Eastwood, who was fixing his hair in a mirror. Marvin fired off a cold remark that made the entire set hold its breath. A real cowboy doesn't comb his hair before a gunfight. What seemed like just a harmless joke was actually a slap at Eastwood's carefully cultivated cool cowboy image. But the tension didn't end there. Behind the scenes, Marvin often mocked Eastwood, saying he'd never lived a single day like the tough men he plays in movies. While Eastwood usually avoided direct confrontation with Marvin, he would occasionally joke to close friends. Some people still live in the past and will probably die there too. People who worked on Paint Your Wagon said the atmosphere on set was so tense it felt like it could explode at any moment. Here were two men, two Hollywood icons, and neither one was willing to back down or give an inch. Each was an alpha wolf who was determined to lead the pack. The filming eventually wrapped up and the movie premiered in theaters, but Marvin and Eastwood never appeared together in another project ever again. To Marvin, Eastwood wasn't evil or bad. He was simply the perfect embodiment of a Hollywood that Marvin no longer recognized, a place where real scars from real battles had been replaced by flawless makeup, and where memories of actual war were drowned out by bright studio lights. For Eastwood, the clash might have just been a difference between generations of actors, but Marvin couldn't stand people who seemed to live solely to be admired and looked at. And soon, in the dazzling bright lights of Hollywood, another man appeared. Someone whose every single step seemed calculated and planned. A man for whom acting was merely an excuse to feed his own massive ego. That man was Yul Brynner. Number 6. Yul Brynner, the king of the spotlight. Brynner wasn't just an actor. He was a phenomenon in Hollywood. A man who treated every single film like it was his own personal coronation ceremony where he was being crowned king. On movie sets, he didn't demand changes to the script or ask for more direction from filmmakers. What he demanded was lighting. Lighting that had to be precise, down to the exact angle. Every single shot had to feature its own special beam of light, shining dramatically on his perfectly polished bald head, just to highlight his presence and make sure everyone noticed him. When a film director complained about all the delays this was causing, Brynner simply shrugged and said, "The audience comes here to see me, so the lighting needs to be perfect." Marvin, who believed acting should come from truth, sweat, and even the scars of war, just smirked when he heard this and said, "I thought this was supposed to be a film, not a lighting show." Their tension escalated quickly from there. During one casting session where they were both being considered for roles, Brynner refused to even shake Marvin's hand. He looked at him and said, "You'll learn how to stand behind me in scenes." That wasn't sarcasm or a joke. It was a declaration of war. A few years later, Marvin was offered the lead role in a major blockbuster movie. His name was already written on the contract and ready to be signed. But when he heard that Brynner was also cast in the film, Marvin said absolutely nothing. He simply signed withdrawal papers to quit the project within 48 hours. For him, no role was worth standing in the shadow of a man who valued spotlight and attention over real substance and talent. From that point on, they avoided each other like mortal enemies who couldn't be in the same room. Marvin's harsh, cutting remarks about Brynner spread all across Hollywood. He doesn't actually act. He just stands there waiting for the light to hit him perfectly. And every time Marvin said something like that, Brynner seemed to demand even more light, even more spotlight, as if Marvin's disdain and contempt only fueled his desire to shine even brighter. Their rivalry never ended for the rest of their lives. Marvin rejected every single project that included Brynner's name on the cast list, while Brynner took Marvin's withdrawals as proof that he had somehow won their ego war. But to Marvin, the only real victory was never bowing down to artifice and fakeness. Marvin could scoff and laugh at Brynner's inflated ego that hid beneath halos of stage lights. But he still had to admit the man had some real talent underneath all that ego. Tony Curtis, however, inspired nothing but pure rage in Marvin. Because in Marvin's eyes, Curtis had absolutely nothing. Nothing except a handsome face and a few sugary, sweet lines he could deliver. And that wasn't real acting. It was a con, a trick, a scam. Number 7. Tony Curtis, the lounge act, pretty boy. Tony Curtis was the perfect poster child of glamorous Hollywood. He had slicked back hair, a smile bright enough to light up an entire room, and he played romantic roles that made audiences swoon and fall in love with him. But to Lee Marvin, it was all just shiny paint covering up weakness underneath. Marvin never bothered to hide his contempt and disgust for Curtis. In a 1960s talk show interview, When the host asked him about Tony Curtis, Marvin shot back with his trademark sarcasm. Tony Curtis might be able to survive in Hollywood, but he wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real fight. That joke was actually Marvin's way of exposing exactly what he despised. While Marvin poured real battlefield memories and experiences into every single role he played, Curtis just showed up on movie sets wearing expensive cologne and delivered a few sugar-sweet romantic lines. During a joint promotional photo shoot where they both had to appear together, Marvin couldn't resist saying it straight to his face. "He sprays on more perfume than all the blood I've spilled on the battlefield." From that moment on, the tension between them was so thick you could feel it in the air. When a major movie studio proposed that they co-star together in a big blockbuster film, Marvin responded with 3 impossible demands. Replace the director completely, rewrite the entire script, and add way more fight scenes specifically designed to expose Curtis as the weakling he was. Curtis was furious when he heard about this and walked away from negotiations. The entire project collapsed and fell apart within just a few weeks. But the feud didn't stop there. At a fancy studio party, a slightly drunk Tony Curtis mocked Marvin in front of a laughing crowd, saying, "Some people have to shout just to get any attention at all. Maybe that's because they have nothing else to offer except the shouting." Marvin, who heard this insult from across the room, calmly walked over, looked Curtis dead in the eye, and replied as cold as steel, "Maybe that's because I once had to shout just to stay alive in battle, and you've never known what it actually means to fight for your life." From that night forward, they were sworn enemies who couldn't stand each other. Curtis refused to ever mention Marvin's name in interviews, while Marvin openly called Curtis the perfect symbol of a film industry that's dying from its obsession with pretty appearances instead of real talent. To Marvin, Curtis's entire existence wasn't just a personal insult, it was living proof of everything he despised about Hollywood. It was a place where people were celebrated and made famous, not because of talent or authenticity, but simply for having pretty faces and being able to say empty, meaningless words. Looking back at the 7 names, when you look back at the 7 names that Lee Marvin called out and refused to work with, you'll see they were all box office legends, genre-defining icons, and even kings of the silver screen. Yet, to Marvin, they all shared one unforgivable trait that he couldn't stand. Some had arrogance so bloated and huge that they thought the whole entire world should orbit around them like planets around the sun. Some had fakery so deep they had forgotten what real authenticity looked like on film. Some had selfishness so ruthless they'd trample all over their fellow actors just to stand alone in the spotlight. And above all else, they treated acting not as a serious mission to live and die for, but merely as a convenient stairway to climb toward fame and glory. Marvin was no saint himself. He had a hot temper, rough edges, was brutally honest, and sometimes said things that left all of Hollywood absolutely stunned and speechless. But that was simply the price of living truthfully and authentically. In a world where every smile could secretly be a lie, and every handshake might be hiding a knife ready to stab you in the back, Marvin chose to live like a soldier. Walk straight, shoot straight, and never pretend to like someone just so they'd like you back. In August 1987, Lee Marvin drew his final breath at the age of 63 after suffering a heart attack. He was laid to rest with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Not as a Hollywood movie star, but as a soldier finally returning to rest among the comrades who had fallen beside him on the battlefields of Saipan decades before. And perhaps that final image, a soldier lying silently among endless rows of white military headstones, says absolutely everything about the kind of man he truly was. He didn't just leave behind dozens of iconic movie roles or films that became part of American cinema history. He left behind something far deeper and more meaningful than that. He left the legacy of a man who never compromised with falsehood and lies, never bowed before glamour and fame, and never shook the hand of someone he truly despised deep in his heart. In a world where absolutely everything can be polished up and packaged to look perfect, Lee Marvin chose to live in the rawest, most unfiltered way possible. He was willing to be hated, willing to be misunderstood by people, as long as he could remain true to himself and his values. And it was that very honesty, the kind of brutal honesty that so many people are too afraid to show, that made him a true legend who will never be forgotten. So what about you? Which star on this list surprised you the most to learn about? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit the like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next shocking and surprising stories from Hollywood's hidden history.